welcome to Revisioning Caregiving and Careers in Academia, a virtual ATHE 2024 session. So thank you to ATDS, American Theater and Drama Society, and the Wellness Community and Aging Focus Group for co-sponsoring this panel. My name is Heidi Neese, and I'm honored to serve as moderator for this session. I am zooming in from Bowling Green, Ohio, which is located on the homelands of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Odawa, and multiple other tribal nations who were forcibly removed to and from the region. I welcome you to share similar acknowledgements in the chat if you would like, remembering that this type of acknowledgement is merely a first step toward fostering inclusive and sustainable community, and that as teachers, artists, scholars, institutions, and organizations, more work is needed. During the conference, to that end, during the conference, there are numerous sessions that directly address decolonizing and indigenizing. And so I encourage you to attend those sessions as you are able to learn and dialogue more. In terms of format for this session today, we will begin with a brief 5 to 8 minute remark from each panelist. We will then engage in roundtable discussion prompted by several questions prepared by the panelists. And then we will end with about 20 to 30 minutes of Q&A from the whole group. When the time comes for Q&A, please feel free to submit questions via the chat box if you prefer submitting that way rather than voicing them out loud. During the course of the session, please do whatever you need to do to create comfortable space in which to participate. Whether that's sitting or standing, turning off cameras or keeping cameras on, eating, stretching, taking a break, etc., whatever you need to do, please do so to optimize your experience. Maybe experiment too. We'll see how this goes. I do request that you please keep your screen on mute until the Q&A session, though. Okay. You know what I did? I totally lost track of my pages, but I'm back on track. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you to the panelists today for their generosity and sharing their insights with us. I want to take a moment to note the vulnerability and generosity of sharing such stories. And so we do request that, what happens in the Zoom room, what's shared in the Zoom room stays in the Zoom room, because we are sharing such sensitive and significant stories. The idea for the session originated during a mid-career mentoring session last summer for ATHE. I'm guessing many of you are here because you have experienced caregiving in various ways during your own careers. My interest in and concern for this topic has developed from being a mother of 2 young children, one with special needs, as well as being the spouse of someone who was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago. So whether your caregiving journey means caring for children, parents, spouses, siblings, other loved ones, yourself, we hope that this space is one that will be generative and helpful to you and that will contribute to ongoing conversations and action within our field and within academia on a larger scale. And with that, I would like to introduce Emilio G. Robles, who is an assistant professor and teaching artist in applied theater, as well as an actor, coach, director, and voiceover professional. Emilio is also an associate artist with Adventure Stage Chicago, a member of SAG-AFTRA, and can showcase an array of professional performance credits on radio, stage, and screen. Emilio joined the Department of Communication Studies at IUPUI, but is no longer IUPUI. What is it called now, Emilio?
IU Indianapolis.
Thank you. In 2019, as a visiting lecturer to re-envision, reinvigorate, and realign the theater program towards applied theater practice, which utilizes the gifts of theater in addressing issues of diversity, inclusion, and social justice to bring theater performance and interdisciplinary applications to non-traditionally or underserved audiences and spaces. Emilio, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you, everyone, and for letting me share my story and also give this platform. I took the liberty of creating a presentation in the slides, so more to keep me on track than anything else. So if you just allow me a moment to go ahead and share my screen, that'd be fantastic. And I'll go ahead and close this up and open up my slides here. Great. So again, thank you so much for allowing us to share space and talk about re-envisioning the story and caregiving and careers in academia. So I thought I'd start out my talk with this idea that I feel really encapsulates my journey with caregiving. And that is this idea that to care for those who once cared for us is one of life's highest honors. And certainly coming from a Latina, Latinx culture that embodies these values of communal belonging, honoring our elders, is something that I really, really valued and just referring to and preparing for this presentation. So just to tell you a little bit of myself, what informs my perspective on campus. So I've been here at IUI for 5 years. I started in the fall of 2019, obviously a wonderful time to start something with COVID coming down on us in 2020. I started as a visiting lecturer and have just now recently finished 2 years of a tenure track position. And as was mentioned in my intro, I was hired to re-envision the theater program towards applied theater praxis from its prior days. I'm in the program, the department, I should say, of communication studies within the School of Liberal Arts. So I'm very isolated within myself. Out of 15 full-time faculty, I'm the only individual who teaches theater. Sometimes I have a couple of adjuncts that assist me depending on course enrollments. And we just recently turned to R1 status at our university. And so the artist identity and affinity is very, very low here because people do not come to my campus to be theater engaged. So that's something that I've really been invested in trying to do and develop. There is Heron, the Institute of Art and Design that's here on campus, but as you all understand about silos, it's very separate. And even though it's blocks away, it seems miles away in terms of collaborative potential. So just to boil down and synthesize the fact that on this campus, I am a one-person show in my department and do it all. Curriculum development, outreach, teaching of the classes, mentorship of students, on and on in my department. So I'd like to share a little bit about just my perspective of what informs my caregiving role. So my main role as caregiver is for my mother, who is about to turn 84. I'm originally from Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is in the upper northeast corner of the state. And as you can see on the right side of your screen here, Indianapolis is about 121 miles away from Fort Wayne, which is my childhood home. I'll be talking a little bit about the details of the journey of caregiving and how that, what the onset of those circumstances were that were covered by the COVID pandemic. But in today's context, I presently drive home at least twice, 2 weekends a month, sometimes 3, to meet essential needs for her care, well-being in our home. That covers everything from the household chores, assisting with meal prep, shopping, doing all the yard work, navigating meds, low-scale maintenance on the home, finances, medical appointments, and communicating with various providers. And I maneuver this territory with very limited human and financial resources. So my extended family doesn't really help. And I do this working within our budget, but certainly my mother's very limited income of roughly about $16,000 a year of Social Security after having been a teacher's assistant in the public schools in Fort Wayne for over 25 years. So in that sense, I'm still a one-person show as an only child dealing with this role of caregiving. So I'm going to just outline some things. And again, I've used this just to talk about the conditions and how this journey all started. And there's some visuals here to help illustrate that. But basically, the first spring after my academic year, the Saturday after I turned in my grades in May of 2020, my mother had a heart attack. It was very severe, but after she recovered, there was a domino of other complications and comorbidities that presented themselves. So for example, there's actually an image here, which is something that has impacted us greatly. She had a mysterious large blister-like sore appear on her left heel from her diabetes. It popped and never quite healed, which led to a diabetic ulcer, infections, tissue damage, luckily no bone damage, but it required 2 hospitalizations. And during this time frame, we were also dealing with the baselines of type 2 diabetes, progressive kidney disease, severe edema, water retention, and undiagnosed sleep apnea, all within the pandemic and landscape of COVID. Following this in November 2020, 21, and again, there's so much overlap here. A series of tests identified that the reason that she hadn't healed with this issue in her foot was because there was decreased blood flow in her legs. So there was 3 surgical procedures that each put stent in her legs to hopefully get blood and oxygen to the heel to actually help it clear. And in May 2021 was the last visit to her wound care, and she was finally cleared. However, as you can see by the next thing from 2020 to 21, physical therapy during this time tried to get her to be walking. Again, insurance played a huge factor in this in terms of the amount of visits that they would have. But mom's mobility was forever compromised because insurance would not pay for any more sessions at home to get her cane ready. So she had to continue, and now she uses a walker. So she's not able to actually move from point A to point B without a walker. Other things included sleep apnea diagnosis. And then, from the time of 2021 to February 22, again, immersed in all kinds of specialists of all kinds: endocrinology, cardiology, neurology, primary care physician, pulmonologist, right? And I schedule all of my commitments on campus, right, around those appointments or vice versa. The most recent thing that I dealt with last year, academic year, was that, again, complications, but she had a prolapsed uterus, which was very extreme and went untreated for many, many years. So finally, we added gynecology into the mix, appointments of every 4 to 6 weeks. Again, primary caregiver there. I can tell you some anecdotes about what it was like to be the only male in that space, and talked to by the nurses and physician, but isolated about wow, I think I could count on my hand the whole year, maybe how many, males, either spouses or children, actually accompany, their mothers, their daughters, their wives to this space. After getting a series of, clearances, she had a colpoclesis, which is essentially a vaginal closure procedure to deal with the prolapse. From March to April of 2023, a lot of complications: incontinence, urination, her blood pressure, all kinds of levels with medications going all over the place. And this year is how I finished my first year in my tenure track position. And after that surgery happened, which I intentionally scheduled over spring break because I knew that I would at least have 1 week where I would be there every day to deal with the immediate aftermath. She had a lot of complications, and I was going there to Fort Wayne 3-4 times a week easily, right? After class, back and forth, to help her deal with the care and the complications. So I'd like to just kind of wrap up by talking about my present. As I look in the school year 23-24, how things look during this academic year on my caregiving track, right? Well, I like to say that things are stable, but certainly not static. Things are always in flux and dynamic with all her comorbidities and her issues. And this image, hopefully you can see to the right, is metaphoric in so many multitudes of ways. I'll leave it up to your interpretations to look at how that mirrors my situation. But one of the things that I always take away in my present in negotiating all this is this feeling of, if I go or something happens to me, my health, my well-being, everything will fall apart. From my mother's care to management of the house to just her well-being and sense of security, and my own sense of security. So I'd just kind of like to end a little bit here with some of the anxieties and concerns of how my caregiving role and my off-campus role, right, and my on-campus roles, how they compete and intersect. So at this point, I'm left with my future, thinking about it, which is full of question marks and exclamation marks. I recognize that I never really have significant off time, right? I see myself getting older, not being able to bounce back in the same way, or needing more recovery time, both from caregiving and from certain aspects of life in academia. And I think to myself, hey, I've made it this far, but what's going to happen when the next crisis hits? How will I prepare for the next challenge or even the next decline? What systems will be in place for me to be able to meet those challenges successfully? And I often find myself wondering, right, is this incompatible? Is this pursuit of this position in academia, my wanting to start a program, is that naturally just, not in sync with the role of caregiving. And then I questioned myself, why should this goal suffer at the risk of another one, the well-being and the care of my mother? Does the cards just stacked, as it were? And then I think about to myself, what could I actually accomplish if I had more capacity in both fronts? And then I'm always grappling with the question, of course, just because my mother can be alone, which thank goodness she has some independence, does it mean that she necessarily should be alone? So I'd like to end on the fact that, again, this space, thinking about the important role that this plays in caregiving and just fostering community and belonging and sharing our story with others. And I found this image that says, as you grow older, you will realize you have two hands, one for helping yourself, and another for helping others. So I think about that in my role as caregiver, certainly as a role of facilitator, instructor on campus, but also thinking about the hand that reaches out to help us support one another as we share our stories in this space. So I'd like to thank you all for providing this platform to share my story. Let's re-envision it. And of course, gratitude to my co-presenters, moderator, and ATHE's focus group on wellness, community, aging, and ATDS. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emilio. And I think, so much of what you say, so much of what you said really resonates. And I think one thing that really sticks out in the specificity of outlining your experience, the reminder that in caregiving capacities, the kind of administrative tasks of you're working with multiple doctors. It's usually not just one doctor, multiple agencies, insurance, right? Like whatever that looks like. It's like another full-time job, right? Just the administrative part of it. Thank you. We're gonna give the space to Lindsay next. So Lindsay Weickamp is an associate professor of theater and the theater program coordinator at Lenoir Rhine University. She has served as an educator, actor, director, and applied theater facilitator in a variety of locations, from K through 12 in college classrooms to professional theaters and community centers. Her work explores the intersections of theater, social change, and human rights education with a focus on how applied, applied theater and arts-based techniques serve to build community and bolster retention rates of first-generation college students. She worked with the TRIO Education Opportunity Program, Upward Bound, for 13 years in several capacities. In classrooms and rehearsal rooms, Dr. Weickamp utilizes storytelling as a means to foster collaboration, creativity, empathy, and engaged dialogue. Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks so much, Heidi, and to my co-presenters and to all who are in community with us today to share this important conversation. As Heidi mentioned, my name's Lindsay. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm zooming in from Hickory, North Carolina. Lenoir Rhine University is in the land of the Catawba peoples. And a bit of context, when I started here at LR 7 years ago, I, like Amelia, was the only full-time faculty member in theater. I did have some adjunct support at that time, and now we have an additional full-time visiting professor role, a full-time staff member, and 1 to 2 adjuncts in theater as well. So we have fortunately grown over the time that I have been here. So I'm just going to do some storytelling today to just share a bit of my story, and then I'm happy to answer questions at the end. But several years ago, when I was a 20-something PhD student at ATHE, I remember attending a session on mothering in academia, and I distinctly remember a panelist sharing, and I'm going to paraphrase this quote, but it was, "I looked down, I obtained my PhD, my tenure track job, and then tenure. And then I looked up and I was single in my 40s and without children." And those words stayed with me. The idea that time would fly and to continue kind of the charge and the hope that I would balance the personal and the professional life. However, her story also became my story, and I followed the same path. And looking back, I realized that I felt I needed to in order to get to where I am today. So that's a whole other kind of conversation that we can have. But I'm now in my 40s and tenured. I was amazingly lucky to find my partner a couple of years ago, yet we seem to have missed the opportunity to have our own children. So we have therefore started a journey as foster parents. So perhaps as a result of putting my career first for so many years, I'm now the leader of our theater program. And this has placed me in a unique position to not only repeat the words that I heard several years ago, but to also do my part in our own program to help better the balance for my colleagues, all of whom are younger than I am and just beginning their journey with their partners or young families. And we ourselves, we have a foster kiddo right now who is 3, and we are journeying to adopt him as well. So in the program, we've developed a number of ways to better care for ourselves and our careers. For instance, re-envisioning the production season schedule, developing more student leadership opportunities, and striving to create a more children welcome, children friendly, and transparent environment to the best of our ability. We're still working every day to enhance those initiatives. On a larger scale, I've advocated for support for both myself and for those in caregiving positions within our larger institution. So I'll share just a few of the things that we have done within our program in case they are helpful to any of you. The first kind of big category is we've re-envisioned our production calendar. And I know this is a bit of kind of just an overarching statement, but quality over quantity, we really took that to heart. We lessened the number of productions that we do every year, and we start early for a more spaced out rehearsal schedule when needed. We know that this is not possible for every program, but for us as a small program still, that meant overlapping rehearsal processes so they could be longer, 2 different casts, 2 directors, but more time for each. And some of you may do this already since a season is a lot of work, but in case helpful info, our faculty decided as a group to start working on the season over the summer. Again, not ideal. This was our decision to do this, and it's been beneficial to us. We have design meetings, production meetings, etc., so we can spread it out at our convenience when it's a bit more of kind of rest time and hit the ground running when school starts. And again, I say rest time, you know, we all know in quotes of what our summers look like. In terms of scheduling, we have worked together to discover the daycare and school schedules for my colleagues within the theater program and to work around it as much as possible with class schedules, meetings, rehearsals, production meetings, again, even being aware of holidays when daycares might be closed. And this is honestly something that I did not think about in my early years as a teacher or director. So this is something that is fairly new, and I regret to say I'd never thought of it before. Something that we just discovered this year in one of our productions is having a later start to rehearsals. And for, again, we have a 3-year-old and my colleagues also have young ones. And just being able to be home between classes for dinner time and even perhaps bedtime and then go to rehearsal has made a big impact on our family time together. And we learned in our particular environment, the students did not mind. They were fine with that, and they're up late anyway, and actually loved the time to have dinner with friends and those kind of things as well. We took a cue from COVID times, and as much as we value face-to-face, we've continued to make Zoom an option, especially for production meetings and design meetings. And we also spread out our work days and our tech. So we do not have very intense, 3 weekends in a row, 2 weekends in a row of work and tech and performance, but we have a much more kind of generous schedule. And that, again, took a lot of planning to do so, but it's made a large difference. In terms of collaboration, I've worked with colleagues to plan robust rehearsal schedules that work for family needs too. I often forget about this or forgot back in the past when I'm directing, I'm in the driver's seat and creating a schedule. Again, something that doesn't dawn on you as much as when you're in a caregiving role. It may take more time up front to create that kind of schedule, but it was great for the process at large. For instance, on the nights that my husband works, he has kind of an alternating schedule. I try to plan music rehearsals or choreography rehearsals and depend on my colleagues to run those. Sometimes we have dramaturgy or design presentations, and perhaps I can be on Zoom rather than in person at those. So it's kind of been a lesson in the fact that I don't always have to be there. And also that I know it won't always be this way. But while I have a young child, it's worth it. We've also enhanced initiatives to provide students with leadership positions, for instance, assistant directors, assistant tech directors, and we've created in-house internships, and that has also helped with the load for our production season. We strive to have a children welcome environment, and we really work very hard at that. Kids aren't always around in our process, but if needed, it's okay. And We've taken this opportunity to think about occasional shows that also involve children, not just ours, but kiddos of our colleagues at the university. First of all, this has opened up what we can produce. And in truth, it also helps provide some childcare for our colleagues. It provides an amazing opportunity for their kiddos to come learn theater, do theater with the big kids, as they like to call them. And for us, it's great because we get to work with them. And just this last year, we did Fun Home. So that was kind of an example of, there's kiddos in that one, and we were able to open up that space. It's also a great opportunity for a college student to be a youth guardian. And that's been super for our education majors as well. Other bonuses of a children welcome environment include modeling that work-life balance for students. This is something I did not see as an undergraduate. Also, we've modeled that if you do have a partner in the caregiving journey, modeling that shared parenting and work. For instance, an example from my personal life is sometimes I need to bring our little one to the start of rehearsal while I'm setting up things with our stage manager and everything. And then my husband picks him up from rehearsal while he's on his way home from work. And so they see that kind of shared responsibility between work and parenting. And then the transparency of life, the life with a big L, while still maintaining a professional environment. On the university level, some things we've done, we've been advocates of sharing with our administration how theater has a very different schedule than other disciplines. I'm speaking to the crowd here of nights, weekends, and we have a very different breakdown of hours. And for instance, one thing we've done is we've tried to have our theater classes be in the afternoon instead of the morning. So we have that time with kiddos, get them off to school. And obviously, if we've moved rehearsals back, that helps us kind of get ready for class and have that time as well. So we're theater classes in the afternoon, and ensuring that administration is also aware of our unique schedule if they're not already. I advocated for my own parental leave when we began the fostering journey, which if any of you are doing that alongside me, navigating the ins and outs of the system is a full-time job of its own. So that has been really helpful. And I was able to obtain a 3-hour course release each semester last year from that advocacy and the understanding of a dean who also understood when I needed to travel based on our unique situation. Also, just cultivating the community around us of trying to ensure that, if a kid is ill, if we need to travel to see a parent, that we step up and help each other. The answer is always in our program, yes, go. And that came from developing the community of support and talking about this openly within our program, having a culture of transparency among our theater colleagues. I look forward to our continued conversation today as we're learning from one another and brainstorming together. And I hope that perhaps we can even build a community of support that could continue after this session, perhaps even going so far as to assist each other with professional development opportunities at our respective institutions, to help build those tenure portfolios. So much of getting those opportunities, is the reaching out, the applying for guest teaching, guest directing workshops to help build our CVs. But perhaps we could even be more proactive with one another to help create those opportunities for one another. So in short, thank you for being here. I believe this is an important conversation and I'm honored to be a part of it.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you so much. I love the kind of actionable items you're expressing here. I will come back to it, but I would love to hear more about what time are you starting rehearsals? I love that. So we'll come back to that. Unfortunately, Kimberly Mellon is not able to join us today. She's one of the panelists, but for exciting reasons, directing in Poland. So that's really, really great. Her information, I believe, is available through FeedLoop through the schedule, ATHE schedule, if you wanted to reach out directly. And so our next panelist is Gabrielle Sinclair Compton, who is a PhD candidate in theater and performance studies at the University of Georgia, where she is researching experimental theater and performance out of place. Gabrielle is also an award-winning playwright whose work has been developed and produced internationally and across the country. Her plays, which include The Resolute, All Hands In, Alcestis, This Little Light, and The Bride Project, have been developed through the Actors Studio Playwright Directors Workshop, Annoyance Theater, and residencies throughout the country. Gabrielle holds an MFA in playwriting from the Actors Studio Drama School in New York City, and she is an associate member of the Dramatists Guild. So welcome, Gabrielle.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here with y'all. My name is Gabrielle Sinclair Compton, and I'm a PhD candidate in theater and performance studies at UGA. I live in North Decatur, near Atlanta, and I'm mom to 2 kids. So I'm gonna talk through kind of like a brainstorming sort of session because I was thinking that this was a great space to like bring in new ideas potentially. Even though I don't know if this is necessarily a new idea, but this is a way for me to talk about myself while talking about theory. So to borrow from Arceli Dokamasi writing about disability theory, today I would like to ask, what if the caregiving body-mind might be something, quote, to think with rather than to think about? With this in mind, I ask, what might caregiver offer, illuminate, and disrupt if we were to establish this role as a legitimate scholarly positionality, a methodology at the borderlands of crip theory, intersectional feminist theory, and queer theory? What would this look like? To begin this offer, I present my own experience. Eye teaming, also called binocular vision, is understood as a visual skill that allows both eyes to work together to create a single clear picture. It's also something my son struggles with and what I struggled with as a child. As a caregiver in academia, my vision is split and it is blurry. As a PhD candidate in theater and performance studies and a full-time caregiver who intends to teach full-time in a college setting and produce scholarly research, I experience an expectation to maintain a split self, to see the world simultaneously with 2 visions that do not work together. I am a mother to 2 boys, ages 9 and 5, both of whom have invisible or hidden disabilities, among them Hirschsprung's disease, ADHD, OCD, and vestibular struggles, that is, struggles with both eyes, both sides of the brain and body working together. As my children's physical and mental health concerns are not necessarily disruptive to others, they are easy to dismiss. I advocate as their parent, continually recognizing, naming, and representing their realities and obstacles in school and daily life as legitimate. This labor of resistance extends beyond the physical labor of care. It's a matter of how I hold my vision of the world through these 2 seemingly disparate lenses and the blurry way the world views me. I cannot stop seeing the world as their mother when I am researching. I feel I am disruptive as a caregiver in academia, even in something like performance studies. I feel like this part of me prevents me from presenting myself with the illusion of neutrality. Because of this, my vision is blurry and the vision of me as a scholar is blurry. The aesthetics of care, Cyanide writes, is zany. That is, the flustered, comedic figure who attempts to do too many things, to navigate the all-at-once world, never fully succeeding at anything with expertise or ease. Because it is zany, it is though it is always shaking. The experience of the world can be scattered and ever shifting. There is no place to land, to rest. Care, then, is a site of ceaseless failure. And as Jack Halberstam has articulated, failure can be queer, productive, and illuminating. And I wonder if care can be too. Caregiver, like woman, is a historical category. For me, caregiver is intertwined with my own experience of time within academia. I was accepted into my PhD program and deferred a year to take care of my son. In the interim, I got pregnant again. My choice to pursue a PhD when pregnant was difficult to accept by my family. A well-meaning great aunt assured me I would be able to pursue my interests in 18 years. When I was 7 months pregnant, I began my first semester as a PhD student and very obviously showing, said nothing, obviously pregnant, but not marked or claimed. My younger son's age is how long I know I have been working on my PhD. When Rory was in the NICU for 3 months, I took a lift an hour and a half to class from the hospital multiple times a week and back as I couldn't drive from the C-section. It was only when my husband, the following semester, had a major heart issue and was for a time in a medically induced coma that I withdrew from my program for a semester. Caregiver is relational, and my positionality is entangled with my children, but it is also entangled with my own sick self. Because academia is forward-facing, I see taking care of myself as taking care of another person in private. I struggle to see my own health concerns as valid in comparison to my children's. Another obstacle is that to claim caregiver as my positionality, I implicate other individuals. specifically my children. There's an element of what Tobin Siebers calls disability as a masquerade, claiming this identity as of caregiver and owning it, telling a story of caregiver beyond the binaries of supermom or a tragic overburdened parent. Caregiver is also post-human, I think. Speak of from a place of sometimes object, a tool, a means for another to thrive. So I'm wondering, how might we extend care as a subject of inquiry into intersections of performance studies, feminist research, and disability theory as caregivers? How might this empower and support caregivers in academia to claim this positionality as a lens for our own research and pedagogical practice, and not only as a problem to be solved? Instead of attempting to cut off the part of ourselves who are caregivers in academia for those hours that we're presenting as such, how might for myself, how might my own caregiver informed vision that is blurry, zany, and entangled with others be a means of informing a meaningful way into research? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gabby. You so eloquently put the ways in which our roles as caregivers are intrinsically linked to who we are as scholars rather than siloed. And so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I think so. We'll enter into some of the questions that the panelists have developed together, and then we'll open it on up to wider questions from the group. And this, I think that this has come up already, but the first question is, what are some effective considerations, policies, practices for caregivers that you have witnessed and experienced in your institutions? So what are some helpful and productive ways in which institutions have supported caregivers? Lindsay, I know you talked about some of the ways changes you're making in your department in the production calendar and everything. So I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more to that, or
Sure.
Gabby or Emilio, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I listed the kind of the main ones, and I'm happy to speak if there are individual questions on one of the specific kind of line items there, and we're continually looking for new kind of policies and practices. And I think one of the big things is just knowing it takes more time at the front end to have those conversations and to get the daycare schedules and to do all of that. But at the end, it's very helpful. And I think that also applies to any kind of travel or weekends when you know you will be away, or times of days that just work best for time with your parent or family member or kiddo, and cultivating that community of empathy and grace and community and care. And I'm thankful that extends beyond our theater program and has also been cultivated within our college as well. So at our level of Fine Arts and Communications College, and from our dean also.
And I have to ask, what time do you start rehearsals?
That's a great question. It varies. It has varied, but 8:30 sometimes. It really has depended, but we would used to start 7:30 and just pushing that back. And there were occasions it would be 9 or 9:30, honestly, and go until between 10 and 11. And again, it's the front end of having those conversations with the students also, and their schedules, and spending the time. And then it really, when you try to make that serve, and obviously not everyone can be served in that, but to try to do the best you can, I think goes a long way. Yeah.
Well, it makes sense with what you were saying about spacing out rehearsal. So maybe the rehearsal process is longer to accommodate for shorter rehearsals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. And that would sometimes mean too, of not we used to be able to, or we used to do like the 5 or 6 days rehearsal. Now, sometimes that means 3 days a week, or, and really just taking the time with it, giving more space for students to have lives outside of theater too, and to support that. It's been good for us so far. Happy to report back as things move on.
Thank you. Emilio or Gabby, is there anything that you want to add?
I would just say that Zoom, for all of its drainingness, is a real blessing for these kinds of meetings where it's like, do we really need to be in person for this meeting? Just like pausing and being like, okay, when does it really matter for us to be in the shared physical space? And I think like what you were saying, Lindsay, about like minimizing the rehearsal like days, I think that makes those days have more intentionality to them because they're like more meaningful. And then these other spaces, they also like Zoom spaces, they also have more meaning too, because this is a purpose. And as somebody's like an introvert, this stuff is actually like draining. Certain things are draining to be around, whereas somebody else is like getting energy from being at all these gatherings. So I guess that's not just being a caregiver. Maybe just as a caregiver, I'm already drained. So like you're already coming in with less battery power. So factoring that in. So I think that's been like almost like an accident. I don't know if that was like on purpose, but I think it's benefited our program.
I think for me, it's interesting because I mean, there's so many ways that I could try to attempt to answer the question. One of the observations that I would offer, though, is that I believe that the cultures vary so much on campus. And I mean that within department, from school to school, from unit to unit, from office to office. So I think just, in my experience, being able to move the needle even slightly by just bringing this on the radar and invite people to and units to take inventories, self-inventories of like what will ultimately serve their communities the best, their colleagues, their staffs, just as Lindsay has done already, is exciting. I mean, one of the things that I know, it's been kind of in contrast to what Gabrielle has shared, but like one of the things that the School of Liberal Arts has recently done is that typically Fridays, which are very low bodies on campus days for both students and faculty, because it's mostly meeting days, but they have moved the time for our monthly all faculty like earlier, right? Because it used to actually be right within the window of like pickup time from like 2:30 to 4:30. And even though there was Zoom option post the pandemic, they listened and trying to listen and have moved that up much, much earlier. So now it's like over the like noon hour. Again, it also in such a juxtaposition where in theater we're trying to fight so much for the right to be back to be back face to face, right? And I think it's important to what Gabrielle just articulated too, is defining the nature of like, well, what makes this essentially need to be face to face versus what are the benefits of holding it digitally or having Zoom as an option? What do we lose? What do we gain? And really using that as an initial rubric, right, for trying to determine how we curate those spaces and how we make those available for everyone.
I would maybe add also, one of the things that I would say here at our university has helped make policies more equitable across the university is that there's now a faculty union on our campus. And so if anyone is on a union campus, a lot of times meeting with union reps to discuss what are options, whether that's, family medical leave, or whether that's pausing your tenure clock, or whatever the case may be. Always a great resource. This question, and I'm sorry, I can't even remember who submitted this question. It's such a great question. How open have you been about your role as a caregiver to individuals at your institution, to your department head, your colleagues, your staff members, admin, students? What, if anything, has informed your choice to disclose, not disclose, or how much you disclose to these individuals? What perceptions do you have about sharing these details of your life? And or what feedback have you gotten from individuals?
I'll start us off. So that question was mine. It's something that I've been marinating on since all of this has happened for the past 3-4 years. So it's been challenging, right? In so many different ways. Like I'm much more akin to, and I'm definitely much more transparent with my students about things that are happening than I am necessarily with colleagues or my department head or other staff. So I guess I'll start there. And I'll just go back kind of anecdotally to, again, when we were in, this was like fall 2020. So we were still pandemic. We weren't meeting in person. Well, actually, we were tried to do some hybrid kind of stuff, which ended up just going south like within a month and a half. So everything just kind of pivoted. But I remember just being very open with what was happening with my students, just so they could understand where I was coming from, understand what the challenges that I was facing. Again, not in a burdensome kind of way, but just like, hey, let's keep it real, y'all. This, if I'm taking a little bit longer to do this, or if I'm pivoting this or whatever, this is the context. And, and I remember at the end of the semester, and this was a speech class that I happened to be teaching that semester, that I got a very impactful email from a student who never really spoke up very much in class. But it was, I mean, it must have been at least a page long about how impacted they were by me just sharing details of my life in that kind of way, and still supposedly, having through their perspective, the diligence to keep carrying things on and to, crack jokes in the classroom and to keep things rolling and to still be present for students. So what I'll share about as a takeaway for that is I was much more cognizant of the other things that my students were picking up and absorbing from me that didn't have anything to do with my content or my discipline at all, but just engaging them as a human being. So I began to be more conscious of that. And, I'm an advocate about, I feel openness and vulnerability communicate strength. And I, feel that that's been, modeled hopefully for my students. In terms of disclosure to colleagues and higher ups or decision makers, that's really tricky. That's really tricky. Especially with the pressures of tenure. It's like, I feel as though times it's like I don't want to lead with excuses or things that might be coming up, or like I'm not giving my best given what my circumstances are. Yeah, it's hard to negotiate who to choose and who to disclose and what the feedback will be. And I think what Gabrielle talked about has really made me marinate in terms of those identities and how we, where we embrace them, where we keep them to ourselves, how much we disclose, and how much it informs our practice.
I probably from imposter syndrome, coming in as a PhD student, where you're like at any moment they're just going to tap you on the shoulder and tell you they made a mistake and that it's time to go. You already are like, don't want anybody to like kind of notice you. Like you don't want to be like marked in a way that'd be like, oh, okay, I don't think you're going to really make it. And I don't know. I don't think that's the nature of my program. I think it's just the nature of like higher education as an institution. But once I moved into being like a TA and like having classes, and I like made choices about my syllabus, I intentionally had my status as like a parent be like something I marked as like, this is informing me creating a care-centered syllabus. And so that I could have like an anchor point, like I'm coming to this from there. It's not like I just read it online as like, this is like a trendy thing to do. I'm coming from this as this. And I think what I noticed from that is I saw my own students as more like fully formed people than I would have otherwise, I think, because they felt, at least several of them felt more comfortable telling me that they were experiencing like anxiety and worry and stress about other classes. Like one student in the hallway said, "You're a mom, can I have a hug?" Like they wouldn't have done that if they didn't know I was a mom. And so those like worlds colliding was really strange and interesting. But so I think as like a teacher, I think it's been something that I've felt that I can in some ways take ownership of and lead with. In other ways, you know, if I'm like scattered and I didn't get enough sleep, I'm running late, like these things, I don't want to use that as like an excuse. um a lot of times motherhood is like tied up with like, well, what did you expect? Like, you're the one who did this. Like, it's not something I was born with. So there's a level of like, um, wanting to keep myself neutral, but only use my caregiving status in a way that informs something in a productive way. But as far as like navigating the field, these spaces are really encouraging. Women's studies and disability studies, I feel like, yes, this is like a safe, good place to be a scholar, because there's like, I don't know, it just feels inviting and healthy. So I feel good talking about it here.
Thank you.
I echo what you both said of this space is just so wonderful. And as I completely agree with transparency, and it's been wonderful to see students also very excited when our little ones come into the space and they show him things about theater. They're kind of getting, hands-on theater for young people training kind of as they're showing them around, and just having that experience, it becomes just deeper. It becomes deeper that way. And then they witness the journey that I didn't really witness as an undergrad, of mothering and juggling and all of those things, as was mentioned as well. Um, and I agree with what both my colleagues have said about kind of who you share information with depends on the space. And I feel very lucky at my current institution that our administration has been very supportive. Very thankful for that.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a few more questions, but I think maybe opening up the space to Q&A. And then, if we have any lulls, I can pepper in a few other questions that are prepared. But yeah, let's open it up. If anybody has any questions or thoughts or insights. Yeah, Janet, go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank you all for sharing your stories, and I really appreciate that this panel includes consideration of multiple kinds of caregiving. When I've tried to organize work at ATHE on caregiving as well, I've tried to incorporate different modes of caregiving, and I think it's really important that parenting is included in these conversations, but that it is not the total sum of the conversation. I appreciate the disability lens brought into this, as well as illness. And so thank you all for that work. I guess I want to, like, a little bit, as a disabled grad student parent of disabled kids myself, push back on the very, common and understandable impulse that so many of us have to be private about caregiving. Especially, I'm hearing across the panel that people feel more comfortable being public about caregiving in situations where they have power, and feel less comfortable being public about caregiving in places where they would be public with people who have power over them. And as understandable as that is, not all of us have the privilege of privacy. when it comes to our caregiving. And in particular, as I think many of us know who have dealt with the physicalities of illness and care, things can happen on a dime. And if people don't know that caregiving is part of your life, it makes it harder for them to support you. But also, I had been in my program for several years before I became pregnant, and everyone in my program knew that I have a uterus, and so does my partner, that this was not ever something that was going to happen by accident. And the people in my program who came before me, who were incredibly private about their caregiving, their pregnancies, in some ways did make it a little bit harder, because there was this sort of discourse that had been created around like, well, oopsie, don't kick me out now, right? And there was no oopsie possible for a person like me. And then, you know, when you birth disabled kids, right, then the caregiving continues. And I think that's something that I'm hearing a lot, that I'm really inspired by all of your presentations to think about, especially now that I'm faculty at an institution, how to think more about agitating for, and, you know, Heidi, you brought up unions, we have a strong union here, how to think more about creating support that is not so temporally limited for people who do all kinds of care working on our campuses, because the idea that we can have so much emergency caregiving respite time in our careers, right? Or like, well, if you give birth, or if you adopt, then you get so much time and then it's over, right? And I would love for my kids not to have like a major medical experience that requires me to take a leave of absence, right? But having come into my position when my kids were 3, I have had no particular support as a caregiver from my institution. It's like, well, you were an adjunct and a grad student when you gave birth, so you never got any support, so you'll never have any support. And thankfully my colleagues are very personally supportive, but this panel has me really thinking about what I can take home to my institution in terms of more structural kinds of care for people who are not in those, like, a birth just happened, an illness diagnosis just happened, right? That the long duration of care is something that we continue to need to facilitate better. So thank you for letting me share my thoughts as well. And I appreciate all of your work. And I'm also just going to pop in the chat here. I was on a group that made a white paper for ATHE on graduate student parent advocacy. So if you go to this link, you'll be able to download our white paper and also a self-advocacy resource list. And even if you are not a graduate student parent, if you know graduate students who are parents or thinking of becoming parents, or if any of that material is applicable to other kinds of advocacy work that you're doing at your institutions over other kinds of caregiving, I offer that as a resource, and I hope we can continue for our field making more kinds of resources about other kinds of caregiving as well.
Thank you so much, Janet. And I think, you know, your point about, I mean, so much of this within academia is about temporality, right? And Lindsay, I'm thinking about how you talked about your experience, right? Like, you look down and you do all the stuff, right? You get your grad degree, you get the job, you do what you need to do, and then you look up and you're like, time is gone, right? And I, just to share a little bit, when I started this tenure track job, I was actually pregnant when I interviewed, and I wasn't I was early enough, I wasn't showing yet. I was excusing myself to go to the bathroom a lot because I was like, felt so sick. But you know, I very much felt like I have to hide this. I cannot, like, the way I had been trained in grad school is you cannot say anything about this. And so it was not until the job offer was made that I said, by the way, I'm pregnant, right? And so, yeah, being more open to talk about those things early on can help kind of a help for future experiences, right?
And I will say,
yeah.
I also know it's a huge privilege, right? Like my advisor has been incredibly supportive of me. And I also know it's a huge privilege to be in a position where I could be vulnerable early on in my caregiving journey, that I was planning to have kids before I had, but I think when we feel that we have a little bit of safety to be vulnerable in those ways, I encourage us all to take those opportunities. And I'm not suggesting we put ourselves in untenably vulnerable positions.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And yeah, I feel like I'm in a position now that's much more secure, that like for others, that I can advocate more. I will say also, in terms of temporality, our union documents say you can have 2 pauses on your tenure clock, right? Well, I had 2 children, and then my husband was diagnosed with cancer, right? So like, yeah, I mean, thinking about structurally, is it really practical to think that somebody might only have 2 big life events in the span of 6 years, right? So thinking through that at our institutions, and how we might be able to help think through those policies as well. So yeah, thank you so much. Other insights, questions, etc.
Hi, everyone. I also just wanted to first offer my really sincere thanks for everyone who's sharing their stories and experiences. I found it extremely moving and just so wonderful to have this space to be able to talk about this stuff. I also really, really appreciate the discussions we've been having about what to share and not to share, and thinking through choices about that, and kind of self-reflecting on choices about that too. I've, in the past 2 years, become a caregiver for my father, who became very sick. And I also, like as part of a chosen family thing, take care of a 3-year-old often. So I have kind of both of those aspects in my life, and especially with my dad, because he lives in Chicago and I'm in Boston. It's felt like harder to hide, but my quite honestly, my initial impulse is to keep that private, partially just because I think I'm a private person, but also partially because I don't want it to sound like an excuse, like a lot of other people have been talking about. But hearing people talk about what sharing has brought them, and also what sharing can do in terms of advocacy, has made me feel really inspired to share more. And also, just reflecting back on not only my career in academia, but my life in general. As a student myself, I never really was aware of my teachers' lives beyond the classroom. And I think that I could have really benefited from that awareness if and when my teachers were willing to share, and have, as I've gotten older and been in more school. So I'm now kind of reflecting on my ability to be that person for others as well. And it just feels so affirming and validating to be in a space where people are talking about this, because even though I know that aging and illness is just a part of being human and it happens to all of us, it can feel very, in my experience, isolating to have that be like an emergent thing in your life. And that it continues. Like my dad was diagnosed and had a procedure last summer, and in the foreseeable future, there's no time in which I think the caregiving responsibilities are going to decrease. So as people are talking about too, with the temporality of that. So all that said, I wanted to share my thoughts, but again, offer my very sincere thanks to all of you.
Gabriel, I think that what you were talking about, again, going back to this idea of how do we consider caregiving as a lens, right? And thinking about, I'm just thinking about the ways that in itself, in addition to thinking about policies or yeah, policies, I guess is the only word I'm thinking of. But in addition to policy and practice, how does truly thinking about care as a lens maybe help instigate also change or consideration or revision within our field as well? I have no answers to that, but it's what's kind of percolating right now for me.
My first thought with that is to think about with disability activism, like nothing about us without us. And so that idea of like visibility and like claiming this would have to be a first step in order for people to unionize or like take that space. Like, how else could you get people together to make these choices about policy if everybody's pretending that they're not doing this?
Mm.
So it would make sense that they would require these like multiple steps to that, to have this space that feels like safe enough that you don't feel like you're potentially threatening your own career by talking about like the messiness of your life, that does not have like the caregiving that like what Amy was saying, like it doesn't necessarily have like an end point. It feels a lot of times like crisis is like, well, when the crisis is over, then we'll get back to the way we were. They're like, well, the crisis doesn't end, so this is who I am. So that's what I would say is that all these things feel like connected steps toward that. In the same way that like disability changes, like ADA policies require putting disabled people in the spaces of power and making these decisions.
I had a question for Lindsay. First of all, I want to echo what everybody said. This is really valuable, and it's definitely got me thinking a lot. I work in intimacy and consent-based practices a lot, and so some of the things that y'all are saying are ideas that we've had. What I'm curious about, Lindsay, is how the conversation got started at your university to make these changes, because I've been hearing a lot of talk. Our school and the theater, the whole theater community in Chicago started going, oh yeah, we're going to get rid of 10 out of 12s. We're going to spread out. And that got a good start, and now it's drying up a little bit. So I'm curious what you or your community managed to do to facilitate that, because it sounds like y'all have some really amazing steps in progress. And I'm so excited to hear about a place where that is working, because all I hear about is the places where it's not working. So you've given me hope. Anyway, thank you. That's what I'm interested in hearing.
I appreciate that. And I want to acknowledge that I work with wonderful colleagues and at a small institution, and that has made a big difference. And truthfully, when I was on the market several years ago too, and looking at different places to go, that was very important to me, of who was going to be spending my days with and working with, and what the size of the institution was and the focus. And we sat down at a table and I was very honest with when we started this foster care journey, because part of, and I've vulnerably shared some things, but part of this was some state to state travel for us. So it's an interstate kind of foster care situation that we're going through. So that every 30 days, we had to travel quite far across the country. And so I just had to be very vulnerable and transparent with my colleagues right off the bat of kind of what the year was going to look like on my end. And they also have little ones, and we just started putting that conversation together, and we've grown with every production that we've done, of making sure that we have postmortems, not only with our students, but with each other, and things with our kind of mission as a program in mind, not only professionally, but personally, and the kind of people we want to be in lives outside. So I acknowledge I've just been very lucky with the humans that I work with, and us being on the same page and opening space for that vulnerability and kind of community dialogue. Yeah.
I love that you mentioned not starting things at dinner time and bedtime. Oh, thank you for bringing that into the room. It's so huge. It's so huge to be able to put kids to bed, and even if they're not fully sleeping, to just like have them fed, PJ'd, story read, kissed, and still have time to get out the door and be on time somewhere. It makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And that was our precious time. If our kiddos are in school or at daycare or, any environment of caregiving, really, too. If we're at work during those 9 to 5 or whatever that would be, and in our unique profession, we've got that rehearsal, that tech aspect of things. So opening up the space where you can to have that window. I'll share at our institution also, our auditions and production season are open to the community as well. So that was actually a big deal, not only for our students, but for actors in the community that wanted to be a part of our production who were also parents. We received a lot of positive feedback from them as well about the start times. And we were worried about that because, they also have jobs like we do. And we've tried to push our classes back a little bit and they still had to be there at 8 or 9. But the choice became, no, I want to have dinner with my child and put them to bed, and these are precious years and we're going to do what we need to do. So again, there was open conversations about that too, because it was a big change. And in thinking back, I mean, there are even some times when we'd have kind of a scaffolded kind of production schedule, calling different people at different times, and sometimes students didn't start till 9:30 or 10 for kind of a half-hour vocal lesson or something, and they were truthfully okay with it. So it became all about communication and dialogue. They were up doing homework. They were excited to have to go get shakes after as a team, and their 2 a.m. stuff. So yeah.
Emilio, is it okay to ask for you to talk more about what your experience has been like as one of so few men doing the kind of care work that you do, and if you feel like not only in the rooms that you're in as a caregiver, but also institutionally and for your students, I imagine. I mean, it's so hard to be the sole caregiver for anybody, and I really, admire the work that you're doing. But I also imagine that there's like a revolutionary component for some of the people that you're communicating about this care, both the people that you need to get support from, but also being vulnerable with your students and modeling being a man who is doing care work, I imagine is really wonderfully world-changing actually for many of your students. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't know. I think one of the things that I'm going back to earlier conversation because, and hopefully I'll address your question because it's so layered and rich. In prepping for today, and again, even in putting the slides together, and again, that was for me to just be able to consolidate things in my head. It really made me think about like the emergence of the role and how now that is something that even though I'm still dealing with the privacy issue and how much I share about that, but now that's definitely an identity of mine. That's something that I'm fully embraced, like, and thinking about how in the future, in the temporal nature of things, like that's going to stay with me till the day that I leave this earth, right? In terms of my gender and being in these spaces, it's so many people I think are surprised until they find out, well, like you're the only child, then well, default, like who else is it going to be, right? But I think maybe the way that I've approached the task or the way that I go about it has, raised some eyebrows, I guess. Like, for example, I go back to the stuff that I did with my mom in the gynecology space, right? Like the fact that so many of the nurses and the doctors pointed out to me, like, you're one of 3 guys that have shown up and been in here. And I'm just, so that's just like boggles my mind, honestly, from me myself. And I find that kind of sad in a lot of ways, whether it's someone who's, someone's partner and like, hey, I'm here with you in this situation, but I'm here just as moral support, even if we're, so I guess I'm still really marinating on what the impact of all this is and what I'm taking away from it. And not just in gender, but like in, culturally, right, as well. Because I think I could argue that, like, especially in most Latinx culture, like that's even more something relegated even more to women, right? Because of the machista nature of things. So what does that mean in terms of navigating that space and that juxtaposition of that identity with this identity and all of that? I have found solidarity in a colleague who actually just about a year and a half ago lost his mother to Lewy body dementia. And that was that journey was really quick and intense, though. Like, it wasn't like, it was like within less than a year, like everything just kind of, plummeted. And we were found out from each other, just from conversations, that I had no idea that he was dealing with that as well. And so, I mean, I think it was strong for me to see, like, man to man, like dealing and navigating this issue. What was that like? How were our experiences unique and similar, and kind of the narratives that people put on us without us shaping them as well. So I hope that answers some of your question, and just unpacking some of that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think it's so often normalized for women and people who are perceived womanly by the world to just kind of silently, quietly do the care that's required. And I think there must be unique struggles, right, to being the person who's doing care who might not fit some of those expectations, but also unique opportunities. And so thank you for
Yeah.
speaking to that as well. Yeah.
And I thank you for reminding me about that too, because this conversation is also bringing up, like, the positives, right, of those things. So again, as a result of you asking that question, just the space, it's like, hey, just like I in the image that I utilize of the hand out, the hand up, like, this is an opportunity. It's a gift as well, right, that I can share with someone else. So thank you for the reminder.
And I think that this conversation also links to Gabrielle. I think you maybe submitted this question, and I think it's a good one to think through. So thinking about stigma as caregiver as a historically gendered role identity, how do the intersections of gender and gender assumptions inform how you navigate academia? And Emilio, you bringing in, also the intersection of Latinx culture, right, and how that also layers on top of expectations or assumptions. And Jenna, I wanted to just call attention to your comment in the chat. Thank you for reminding that Jerry Moraga has written about this as well. So another great source to look to. But just wanted to open up if there's any other, like, thoughts or reactions or insights.
I'll put into the air that as we're thinking about policies in our institutions and about care, that women of color and LGBTQ plus people of color already do an inordinate amount of mentorship and care of our students. And so when folks have their own lives outside of the institution in which they have care burdens, and also are then overburdened professionally with care labor, that's really something for those of us who are white to think about stepping up to help shoulder some of that labor, as well as hiring more people of color so that our students can have the representation that they need and also have that labor be shared.
And even in addition to, right, thinking about the ways how can that labor be given credit, right? How is it that we can render that labor more visible, and therefore find ways in our PT documents or whatever the case may be that does not just fall into like the service, the really large service bowl, right? Yeah. Donatella, yes, please.
Hey, thanks for this conversation. Sorry I had to step out, but I'm back because we ended early, because this is so important. So speaking to the points, Heidi and Janet, that you just brought up, I wondered about what's going on in your institutions, and I'm sorry if you already covered this, that like recognize disproportionate mentorship, as Janet was saying, and that recognize the ongoing vagaries of COVID with regard to caregiving. And I share that at UC Riverside, where I'm at, we have this annual thing called The Call, which is this long document about all the regulations that we're supposed to consider for like hiring and tenure and promotion and merit guidelines. And we, since COVID, developed language that's like recognizing and each department also has to like annually send in our own statement about stuff, so that like when our files are evaluated, it like doesn't look bad that there's like not legible like publications and certain kinds of work that we didn't do. So we have statements like reminding people about things like childcare and like how difficult it is to switch online. But I will say, like in the past week, we had to do this document again for our department, and people were kind of like, oh, we don't need to update this. Like this is fine. Like we've kind of moved on. And I was the one who was like, just so you know, like people were given permission to keep teaching online actually for an extra year if you were caring for someone who is immunocompromised at home, or if you were the full-time caregiver of a child who was ineligible to be vaccinated for COVID, which happened, years after adults. So, and I had to explain, like, it was working 2 full-time jobs. Like, we've been talking about that as well, and working every weekend. And I realized like my colleagues like didn't remember this. And the new policy for this year actually says we're no longer allowed to like articulate how we were affected by COVID, but to show the impact. And I was explaining, I can't show an absence. I can't show that I couldn't have time to write. And I'm not allowed to tell you because I was full-time caregiving for my toddler. So I was using this email to my colleagues to like basically tell them that, because I can't put that in my statement that's formally in my file. So I wondered, like, if you all have policies about this that still like acknowledge what's going on now and from a couple of years ago, because files are like evaluated over the past few years. And I wonder what other strategies you might suggest for navigating that. Thank you.
I will say, I know that this hasn't happened. This is more on the side of like, for individuals who are carrying more of the caregiving of students, right? The mentoring of students. I know that there has been discussion here about looking at workload, and for people who are carrying more service in those forms, is there a way then to decrease the course load, right? And so that it's the labor is still there, but the allocation of effort, it has shifted some, to try to still be able to retain some time to do scholarship as well, right? So as I said, that hasn't happened yet, but there's been discussions around that here.
Donatella, your question makes me think of 2 things that I want to put out into the air. I know I'm not a panelist and I'm talking a lot, so I appreciate everybody's, but the 2 things that come to mind are, in my particular full-time contingent role at my university, service is not defined. And the institutional intention around that is for those of us on faculty to be able to have flexibility in what kinds of service we would like to take on and we feel comfortable taking on. But if you do the same labor for 2 years, then the union considers that to be part of your job description. And so I've been warned as I'm piloting projects in my department and things like that to think about who I can partner with to take time off from doing it periodically so that I don't do it for 2 years in a row and have it automatically added to my contractual expectations. So that's something that I find really interesting. The other two things, you know, that bringing COVID explicitly into the conversation brings up is that, first of all, as I think we know, right, the storage of those vaccines is very, very finicky still. And I am quite curious how people who are continuing to have babies are getting their kids vaccinated before age 3, because there are no longer mass vaccine sites. At least in New York State, they do not any longer send someone to your house. They used to have someone, you can have someone come to your house and give you a vaccine, but they don't anymore. Pediatricians don't have them, but you can't go to a pharmacy unless your kid is 3. So how are you getting your 6-month-old a COVID vaccine? How are you doing it? I don't know, and that's horrible. And also, we know that as a let alone what we know of as long COVID, as a vascular disease, there are associations of higher cancer rates. We will be dealing as a culture with higher burdens of care from now on. And I think that our institutions and our field have to not only try to continue minimizing how often we all get COVID, but also how we are going to prepare for the fact that cancer and long-term disability and health crises are going to be an ongoing part of our future in an even larger way than they have been before now.
I'm gonna jump in just for a moment, Gabrielle, and then I want to hand it back over to you. I just want to recognize that it is 3:30, and so if people need to go, please, like, temporality, time we've been talking about, right? It's very precious. So thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for the panelists. But we can also stay on here for a few more minutes and talk some more. So I just wanted to throw that in there. And Gabrielle, you had something else you would like to say?
Oh, hey, sorry, I don't want to drag y'all. I was just gonna add to what Janet was saying about it makes me think about how, like, with disability theory, this idea that like all of us will experience disability at some point. I don't think that there's that kind of idea with caregiving, and I wonder why. And I wonder if it's something about, like, we have kind of an isolating neoliberal, like, if you're really successful, you're very alone, right? This idea. And so maybe that's why connecting those two together would be useful with thinking about policies and stuff. Like, at some point, everybody's going to be providing care for somebody as well as, like, somebody will experience disability. Maybe that would be helpful.
That's a really great point. And I wonder if it's just also kind of socially, culturally, how we think about caregiving in and of itself. And I think that can also be tied up with gender as well, right? Like expectations, notions of what counts as labor and what doesn't count as labor, and how that's connected to capital, right? And then if people have lots of capital, they are sometimes not the ones doing the caregiving, right? Of direct, like directly, it might be hiring somebody. And I don't want to sound critical of that, because that is also oftentimes very necessary, right? To provide the best care. But I'm just thinking about how all of these, I mean, socially, societally, we are set up in such a way to maybe not think of caregiving as something that we are all going to be experiencing at some point. Those are just my off the cuff thoughts. and they're very jumbled. But yeah, I thank you for that question and that point. I think it's really important.
I will say, just as a point of interest, like a couple years ago, a colleague that was over in Heron, which is the School of Art and Design on campus, a mutual colleague introduced me to his work because he was actually doing a study on basically blowing up the assessment models of things. And the way that he went about it was, you know, in a nutshell, so innovative, because there was like one assessment model that was almost like a video game and gaming and choose your own path. And there was traditional things and different ways that people that staff and faculty that were going up for review could like curate their own, hey, look at this, and for create like a narrative. So one of the things that I was thinking about in engaging with his research and his study, which he's still trying to advocate for and develop, is this piece, right? In terms of like, how do we authentically assess folks based upon context, knowing the full context of who they are and what they're dealing with. And so as he approached me about, you know, being like sharing part of my story and participating in the research, I was like, you know what, if this just helps move the needle or helps, you know, us think, admin or decision makers or whatever, like, then count me in. But it really makes me think about like that we need to be able to take that into account too, right? And just as whether we are a staff or a faculty member just from year to year, or whether it's pursuit of tenure or just what it is, like, how do we contextualize people as human beings? And then consider that with what they have the capacity to give and what their successes are from year to year and how that fluctuates, as opposed to rigid lines or even pausing a clock, right? Yeah.
Well, thank you all again so much. I hope I get to see many of you in Georgia next week. I hope that Delta flights are going next week. And if you're not going to be in person at the conference, we'll be thinking of you. And again, I feel like I have learned so much, and I have so much more to think about, and I'm excited about thinking about it. So again, thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.